most of my time in the work that I do is dealing with other people's fears. We're afraid of being, if we turn up and it's the real me, is that going to resonate with the world around us? And chances are it probably isn't. Our biggest strengths potentially will end up being our biggest derailers. And certainly as leaders, we need to begin to develop other aspects of our personalities that are not innate in order to create that balance in us. Think about not time, but think about energy. You get to a point where you've just done something that you really know absolutely energizes you. And that is a great moment to get on and do those things that you hate doing.
Today, I have the pleasure of sitting with Shirley, who is my business coach and a person I've been working with for quite some time now. And it is a very special episode because we're chatting about the journey of being a founder, the challenges of being a founder on a very specific topic, on the imposter syndrome. And I really hope we can do more of these episodes because I want to open up the conversation on topics that can be quite difficult sometimes and learn really more than even share, but use my experience and the ones that we have both seen as a way to pass on the message. So Shirley, thank you for being here with me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Why don't you tell everyone in your own words, what do you do? How do you get to where you are right now? And a bit of your own personal journey.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to, Jaime. Thank you very much. Well, looking back at my own personal journey, it's been quite a long journey, of course. I started, once I'd done my PhD in organizational health, I started a large global consulting company and spent 7 years doing strategy consulting work, which was great. I did lots of mathematical modeling, which I was really very keen on, and got to travel a lot, and it was very varied. But after a while, got a bit boring, and boring has been one of those words in my life. When things get boring, it's time to make a big change. So I made a huge change in that I decided A, to have a family, and B, to become self-employed. So more than 2 decades ago, I decided to start my own business and move well away from strategy consulting, and the mathematical models themselves were getting too predictable. So I moved to something much more complex, which was human beings. And human beings are infinitely complex, and that has really grasped my imagination then and kept me really busy for the last 25 years probably, in terms of really working with high potentials. That is my niche. I'm fascinated with people who have not only achieved a lot but have an enormous amount of headroom to achieve so much more, and to help those individuals to really identify and access that potential. So I tend to work with people when I initially meet them who have probably between 10 and 35% of their potential has already been reached. And ideally, they've got at least another 35% to access. So I work with them, as I've worked with you, to tap into that potential. And that's what absolutely is my passion in life, basically. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
No, it is. I mean, I've gotten a lot of that experience passed on to our work, to the work that we did together. How do you, just to kick things off with a question about your work, how do you assess whether there is potential? Because people have different definitions of it. When you meet someone, how do you assess whether there is potential to work on?
That's a wonderful question, and it's a very complex question. I think part of that is really just tapping into, first and foremost, I have a certain toolkit to understand where they are. So I need to understand the start point, and obviously look at some of the information that's available about them. That could be everything from a CV to using personality profiling tools or other tools to understand who they are, where they're coming from, what their strengths are, what the development opportunities are, and where the potential blind spots are. So normally I start with that. That's before I even meet them, I typically have at least asked a couple of questions and got a couple of answers, and I've got some understanding of who they are. I guess assessing their potential is very much a question of listening to them and seeing just how much self-reflection there is there, how much self-awareness there is there. And I guess that is really the crux of it, which is if somebody's not prepared to look into themselves, because our potential is not going to come from outside of us, it's coming from inside of us. And if we're not willing to look at ourselves incredibly critically is one word, but curiously is, curiosity is probably the key word more than critical. I think critical can also be a showstopper in some ways, but really looking curiously and saying, who do I have the potential to be? And in what size, shape and form am I actually getting in my own way? Because that's what most people are doing. And I think maybe that ties in with the topic for today is that, to what extent are people getting in their own way? What are they aware of? What are they willing and able to look at more deeply? And quite frankly, if I want to access that potential, I've got to help them to own their shadow. And we all have a shadow it's part of ourselves that we don't like very much, that we try and hide from other people, that we try and hide from ourselves. And in some cases, we've done it so well, we don't even know it exists. But it's really about embracing that shadow and becoming a whole person. And that wholeness, as I say, if we're talking about 10 to 35%, that's nowhere near all of us. It's just a fraction of us. And there's always going to be a part of us that remains hidden. So we have to accept we're not going to get to anything like 100, but the shadow will enable us to reach a depth of understanding about ourselves that we can unlock so many hidden treasures inside ourselves that will enable us then to interact with other people at a completely different level. It's like accessing another universe. That's
Is
what I look for.
not wanting to access your shadow, is that a showstopper for for you,
For me personally,
for your work with that person? If
yeah.
they suddenly say, I don't, that's not where I want to go, I don't want to own that, I don't want to explore that.
Yeah, then it's going to put a significant limitation on what they're able to achieve in terms of what sort of growth curve they're going to be able to get onto. And whether or not they'll be able to stay on, if they have got onto a very steep learning curve, whether or not they'll be able to stay on that curve. So from my perspective, it's really hard work working with me. It's, I believe in certain phrases and they are true, no pain, no gain and stuff like that. It's really true. I mean, accessing, and I know from my own personal journey that accessing your real potential is an incredibly painful journey because we spent our whole lives trying to hide things from people, including ourselves. I mean, and we're trying to, really get to the crux of it and dig quite deep. And basically somebody will be limiting themselves. So it's no longer interesting for me if somebody's only ready, willing and able to access 2 or 3% of their potential. That's not the type of individual that I'm typically working with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with people who are incredibly courageous, who are prepared to put in not just the effort, but really to persevere, and to go the journey. And that requires, trusting me, because I'm going to take them outside the comfort zone. In order to get into the growth zone, we have to go through the fear zone, and it can be a very long and dark and, potentially frightening journey as you confront all sorts of fears that you've probably had your whole life long for various reasons. And you have to go through those fears to get to the growth and learning zone, which means that's where the potential is. So if somebody's not really, willing or able to actually go that journey with me, then that's just not going to work. So I would step away from that situation respectfully. They could work with other coaches that may want to optimize certain things about what they do and how they do it, their performance, but it wouldn't be me trying to effectively double their potential in a relatively short period of time.
Well, to be honest, that's one of the things that I love about working with you. That every conversation, it is a challenge, and I love that challenge. It is a very practical exercise of introspection. Every conversation that we have is not comfortable most of the times, and I think trust is a key word, because I gotta trust you to be able to expose myself. But I could also imagine big characters as founders, that are potentially not willing to be to go through that introspection and thinking about themselves. Do you believe that people can be successful and get to, being at the top of massive companies without owning their shadow? Have you seen that happen even from afar, from outside?
That's a good question. I think in the past, possibly it was achievable. I think the more we're developing, the more advancing, and the more complex things are getting, and the more we need to bring very, very complex, different functions, different personalities, so much difference geographically. We're bringing so much more diversity together in order to generate new solutions to, in some cases, new problems, that I don't think this is possible anymore. I think if you want to get to the very top of an organization, be a founder who's going to go the full distance, I can't imagine that situation if you were not going to embrace your shadow. There would be far too many, barriers in the way, I think, no, I can't imagine that actually.
I'm asking because I'm thinking of the Elon Musks of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world. We don't know if they owned their shadows at the end of the day, right? We don't know that side of them, which maybe they do. Maybe they do own or did own their shadows. And also, and this brings us to our topic today. A lot of the things that I see in the rock star founders, so to say, it's almost a very powerful portrayal of themselves in front of everyone, of a strong character that has potentially almost no exposed weaknesses, no fear to be there, to be at the top. And part of that, yeah.
No, that's very interesting because you just mentioned two people there, and I been looking at, and I do use quite a lot of quotes from both Steve Jobs as well as Elon Musk. I think interestingly, I was watching an interview with Elon Musk the other day, and I love the phrase. In fact, I absolutely, it's been in my head ever since. Which was his description of being a founder was staring into the abyss whilst chewing on broken glass, and I think that actually describes being a founder really well. Someone who's staring into an abyss is really staring into the darkness of their shadow. The fear of failure, the fear of not being in control, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of, rejection. I mean, these people are constantly under the scrutiny of everybody else. Steve Jobs, you look at some of the quotes that are in terms of, am I being the best possible person I could ever be? Am I reaching my full potential? Am I living the life I want to lead? Am I stretching myself? And he was constantly asking himself on a daily basis whether or not, he was really at his limits. And I think in both instances, we can think what we like and we can portray them as we wish. But I think both of them are more than aware that they were, pushing it to the limits in both cases in order to achieve what they have achieved. And, that's not going to happen if you're not prepared to go the journey. And I believe both of them have done exactly that.
And I think they were also very good at not stopping even when the world seemed to be against them. At many different points of their lives. And one of the reasons, the only way to do that is to really feel that you can do it and believe in yourself. But that takes an element of understanding that's the potential, that side of you that could potentially be preventing you from going into that. And that, to me, it brings me to what we're discussing today, which is, the imposter syndrome, which we speak of lightly these days, probably because we have spoken so much about it. But I feel like, especially personally, I have not gotten to, the depths of what it means. And I think you introduced me to the concept of the 4 P's of the imposter syndrome, which opened up my perspective into many other aspects of it beyond simply feeling like you could be exposed as a fraud, for example. So I would love for us to explore those, to go through these. Why don't you tell us which are those, the P's, the 4 P's?
Yeah, so the 4 P's of imposter syndrome are: first, perfectionism; secondly, analysis paralysis. I start with those two because they're probably the ones I'm most likely to exhibit most of the time. The third is then people pleasing. And the fourth is procrastination. So they're the 4 P's.
Let's go through each of them. And we can start with the ones that you started with, which are your personal ones. I mean, for me, I'm a people pleaser. It's a blessing and a curse, mostly a curse, I would say. Why don't we start with perfectionism?
Okay.
And how does that reflect in everyday life? What does a perfectionist in the context of the imposter syndrome look like?
I think interestingly for perfectionists, well, they're never satisfied with any sort of status quo, and they're always looking for the next biggest challenge. So, the word satisfied is basically not in their vocabulary. They're always looking, what can they do more, better, bigger? So even as they're in the process of delivering one thing, they're trying to find the next thing, the next challenge, in order to prove that they are good enough, I guess. And I think it's a real struggle about a fear of not being good enough, that really drives that. So, I look back, maybe I use examples from my own life because those obviously I own those examples. So for me, if I was doing, for example, a maths exam at school, I would be devastated if I dropped 2% in a maths exam and came out with something like 98%. That would be absolutely the end of the world. I'd have friends who were like, they'd be so glad they'd passed, and they'd be like jumping for joy, and they'd be, and I would be absolutely decimated, mortified by the fact that I got an answer wrong, or I'd made an error, or, it could be something really tiny, and I would be completely beating myself up. In terms of my ego, critical parent would be in full swing saying, why did you make that mistake? And how stupid, how could you be? So you can see that there's this sense of inadequacy that's driving the syndrome. And in some ways, these, like a coin, it has two sides. We have an element to it that's actually positive. And I think everything in life, however bad, whatever experiences you go through, there's going to be a huge positive in it. You're going to come out a stronger, more resilient person, definitely. And it's going to put tools in that toolkit. But on the other side, it's going to do damage. So, and at some point you have to own the damage and try and rectify it in some shape or form. So, I think with perfectionism is it really pushes you to be the very best you possibly can be. So it's never going to be enough.
But that sounds almost good in a founder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a natural trait of founders is they are striving, and this is where this is where the line comes. They're striving to be perfect. They're striving for perfectionism. And what's really interesting about that, the huge plus in it, is that in striving for perfection, through continuous learning, and we talked about that very, very steep learning curve, and in some cases, most of the people I work with are literally scaling vertical cliffs. It's no longer a curve, it's a cliff. That in striving for that continuous learning, they reach a level of excellence that enables them to be successful founders. No one will ever be perfect. This is not possible. Certainly my motto in the past was make the impossible possible. And I lived with that for a very long time as my motto, my watchword. Trying to be in multiple places at once, trying to simultaneously, constantly multitask and so on. And I guess a lot of founders also have this, that they like to be doing many, many things simultaneously. And you could say this is on the, neurodiversity spectrum or whatever. I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that as well. But in terms of making the impossible possible, perfectionism may never be reached, but you can get very, very close to it. And it's the question of how close you can get is really interesting. And as I'd say, that continuous learning leads you to excellence. And I think if you don't aspire to excellence, the founder route is not for you.
But where's the line? When do we go from healthy perfectionism to imposter syndrome?
Oh, that's a very good question. When is it good enough? When we look at the 4 Ps, I don't necessarily think they are discrete. I think there are overlaps between them. When is it good enough? When do we let go? And maybe part of the work that we have to do, and certainly looking back on my career, I struggled a lot with perfectionism for a very, very long time until I looked at it much more pragmatically. I think I learned to look at what I was doing more pragmatically and think of it in terms of value add. I hated the phrase originally, and I even cringe when I say 80-20 today. I always think, oh my God, I hate that 80-20, and we talk about agile and barely good enough and just good enough and whatever, just in time and so on. And I think, okay, but trying to embrace that to a certain extent and saying, where's the value? What's the maximum value for the smallest possible amount of effort? And then thinking, there is a point at which it tails off. That curve does flatten. And how much effort and time and how much of your life are you prepared to dedicate to actually trying to get towards that last fraction of a percent? And I think accepting that you might want to do a lot more with your life and that this effectively would limit what you can do is maybe a dialogue you have to have with yourself. I find it very difficult to do it. I think now I realize that there's a trade-off and that there's, that last little bit as the curve flattens almost to the point that it's horizontal is not worth it. It's going to take too much effort and you could do so much more with that energy. So I think in energy flows and think, okay, what's the biggest bang for buck, and using the energy I've got to actually achieve that.
So you think at some point the founder, the person that is going through, that is a perfectionist, is going to feel it when it's too much? Or are there or could they just continue without noticing that they are entering imposter syndrome territory?
I think the chances are that if they're striving for perfection, they won't be able to move forward.
So you think it becomes paralysis almost?
Yeah. I think potentially then other elements of it will kick in. So I think procrastination and analysis paralysis will kick in because there's a point at which they're striving for something they're not going to reach. And that could, prevent them from moving forward. So ultimately, I think it will be a derailer.
It's interesting because then it could be that one P could lead to another P. And then you go through them, but you could start from any of those. Well, maybe if you're procrastinating, you're not going to be a perfectionist, but it could be interesting to see what the dynamics are between those, how the person goes from one to the other, but still within the umbrella of the imposter syndrome.
Well, yeah, I mean, procrastinating could be, for example, that you're not able to let go of something that hasn't gone as well as you wanted it to. So for me, procrastination does go with perfectionism because let's say you've done something, you've not done it to the level of, that you're not happy with what you've done in terms of it's not good enough. Back to this perfectionist, I would say it's one of those core beliefs that we think this is not good enough. I'm not good enough. And that leaves then the question, and I think procrastination is not being able to move forward because you're looking back and saying, you're asking too many questions. You're asking too many why questions. And that can be the source of procrastination. Why is something the way it is? And trying to get to the bottom of too many whys. The question why is a loop. How many whys can you ask? I think they normally say give up on the fifth. But you can go through a loop of constantly asking why. And that's, you're procrastinating. It's not going to help you to move forward and make a decision.
So. That's super interesting because it also reminded me of a situation that I had over the summer, fundraising. And I remember you told me at one point, stop working on your deck. Your deck, it's already ready. And it is an interesting example of how I was being a perfectionist, but using it almost in a procrastination way so that I would avoid doing what I should have been doing and what I had to do, which was calling investors. And there was, I think, I had not thought about it. I'm just thinking about it now, but it sounds as if the imposter syndrome was also stopping me from doing something out of the fear that was underneath. So yeah, now it makes sense that you, in trying to be a perfectionist, you are procrastinating, you are being paralyzed, and you are not moving forward. So they are definitely, or they seem to be connected at points.
Yeah. So I think it's triggering the limbic system, the amygdala, and it's very much this freeze, fight, flight, freeze and fawn response. And I think it's very much the freeze, which is you're literally distracting yourself with things. I mean, if we looked at, for example, the presentation, a lot of people get really trapped into either wordsmithing or looking at the colors, looking at the fonts, looking at the, and they spend a very long time messing around with that deck. The reality is, for example, if you're fundraising and you're meeting people either online or face to face for the very first time, the first impressions are going to be made not on the basis of what you have in that deck. It's going to be much more about how they interact with you and your body language and what that says to them. So that deck, we're talking about maximum 7% is going to come from the what you're going to actually have in that deck. And so you messing around with it for hours and hours, weeks and weeks, is completely wasting that time that you've got to think about how you're going to interact with them, which is going to be so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we are actually distracting ourselves, but we are paralyzing ourselves, and we're ineffective at that point in time, which is where the danger comes from.
And it feels that it is all coming from fear somehow. And we were discussing about this just minutes ago. What are the fears that are underlying the perfectionism?
Yeah, well, I think fear of failure is a massive one. And again, definition of what failing is might be quite useful to even think about there. But fear of failing, either in your own eyes or in the eyes of other people, because again, there might be a people-pleasing element to perfectionism, of course. That you're being expected, there are expectations there that you're trying to meet, and that you might be failing to meet those expectations. So they might be going hand in hand there. Definitely fear of not being good enough. I think that is going to be absolutely key. And then the question is, who determines what good enough is, and whether that is actually achievable. I think fear basically is the thing that I spent most of my time in the job that I do now, the work that I do, is dealing with other people's fears. That is the work that I do. What is getting in the way? What's blocking me from moving forward, from developing the potential that I have, and from learning and growing? And 99.9% of the time is actually a whole host of different fears. And I think the fear of actually turning up and being the authentic you, and so many people use this word authentic, and I think it's we're afraid of turning up and being ourselves. We're afraid that the world is going to question it, they're going to criticize it, they're going to not like it in some way, they might reject it, that we're going to be measured and found to be wanting in some way. So authenticity is a very hard thing to embrace. And I think we're constantly questioning, if we turn up and it's the real me, is that going to resonate with the world around us? And chances are it probably isn't. Hence the flack that people like Elon Musk gets, or Steve Jobs for that matter. So I think the world around us is expecting us to be very inauthentic. So some of these things are not going to tally. If we turn up and it's the real us, it's going to fall short of the expectations that maybe, the world has of a founder or a great CEO or a, successful entrepreneur. And maybe those expectations are completely unrealistic. So
what if the authentic you is a perfectionist?
And then I think that's part of the work that you have to do in accepting your shadow, i.e., you aren't perfect. And the best you can ever achieve is going to be excellence. And you're going to have to be satisfied and learn how to be satisfied with that. And the thing that helped me with that is, I think, again, I cringe when I even hear the words, but it's radical acceptance. I am not perfect. I never will be perfect. I can aspire to be perfect. And in so doing, I can become absolutely excellent at what I do, but I'm never going to be perfect. And being excellent is going to have to be good enough. And that is a lot of work, I think, if you are a perfectionist, and as I am, you're always going to cringe at that one point you miss, that one thing you get slightly wrong. And often, quite frankly, I ran a workshop a couple of days ago with a group of people, and at the end of it, they were a very mixed bag of individuals with a very mixed amount of knowledge of the subject that I was dealing with. And I asked them, thumbs in the air, which is the thumb, the universal measurement tool, how they felt at the end of the session, how much they'd learned and how they felt and how much they enjoyed it, and so on. And I thought, in many ways, are they actually in a position to be able to judge this? You know, and it was a mixed response. Some people thought it was great. Maybe they were people pleasers. Maybe they wanted to give me a positive resonance. Some people, perhaps they wanted to, I don't know, perhaps spar with me a little bit and sort of say, what have you got to teach me? And so it was a very interesting mixed bag of stuff. And I thought, that's interesting. Whereas in the past, I would have thought, oh my God, if not everybody's got their thumbs in the air and saying it's the best thing they've ever seen, then somehow, I am not worthy. And I think that's half the problem with perfectionism. You are questioning your self-worth. You are questioning the value add. And even now, I'd say as a perfectionist, normally, I notice it when I ask people for recommendations or references, and they write things about me, and I think, oh my God, that can't be me. They're not writing that about me. And I had this horrible sort of moment of real utter humbleness where I think that can't be about me. In fact, recently I asked somebody for reference and it was so unbelievable. I wrote back and said, wow, are you sure? I mean, surely not. I mean, literally trying to convince this person that it was over the top. And he said, it's you, embrace it. And it just made me feel so totally humble. And I think that's the problem with perfectionism is that you always feel that you are not worthy. And I'm a great believer in earning the right. And so that all gets mixed up together in some ways. But can you recover from perfectionism? I don't think you can ever fully cure it, but I think you can get yourself to the point where you accept that 99% is pretty much good enough.
Yeah. What if, what you've said, reminding yourself that you will never be perfect is definitely the biggest and the best way to start. What are other tips and recommendations to address it and to deal with it?
I think set realistic targets. I think there's a whole way of, set yourself realistic targets. I think if you're a perfectionist, you're absolutely your worst enemy. And you're always thinking that you can do more and, on to the next thing, the biggest thing. You're always trying to, well, I guess pretty much you live by the phrase under promise and over deliver. So you probably promise a lot already, but you always go the extra mile. You cannot stop yourself from going the extra mile. And I know even now that I personally struggle with this, which is if I think, well, I'll just put another couple of hours in and then this and this and this and this. And, you always set the bar too high. And I think setting realistic targets is very important. I think, managing your own expectations and the expectations of others is also really important. But I think it's a continuous struggle. Yeah.
Let's move on to the next, to the procrastination, which we discussed as already. We touched upon it.
Yeah.
What are the signs of? I think we are all familiar with it, either on ourselves or because we see it on other people. In the context of being a founder, what is it that you hear and that you can immediately associate? What are the quotes?
Yeah. I think typically, the sort of everyday procrastination. I was looking at a lovely cartoon literally earlier today, and it was somebody was sat at their desk, and it was like, oh no, I'll just better clean up my desk. It's a little bit messy. I'll be able to work much better if I clean up my desk. And it was like, oh, I better get myself a glass of water because I'll be so much more productive if I get myself a glass of water first. And oh, I better, and yeah, you can think of a million reasons why you shouldn't start right now. And a bit like when I think about my kids, it's like, yeah, just one more episode.
Yeah.
And that, that one more episode, we never get to the end of that one episode. But I think in reality with procrastination, I think a lot of it is around self-doubt. Maybe not feeling in control of a situation, not knowing what's going to happen as a result of something. If X, then Y. So I think a lot of procrastination might be driven by not only self-doubt, but also uncertainty. Certainly as a founder, you are going to have to face into the abyss, as we heard from Mr. Musk. And that means uncertainty, volatility, the VUCA world, complexity, ambiguity. And I think it is frightening to do something and not know what's going to happen as a result. So there's no cause and effect because, no one's done it yet. So as a founder, you're a pioneer, and sometimes I think about, the very sort of the pioneers of the past, for example, going back to medieval times when people thought that the earth was flat and you could fall off the end, and yet they still got on a ship and they sailed away, not knowing if they're going to fall off the edge of the earth. I mean, that's quite an interesting, mind-blowing concept, really, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Or, and I think sometimes reframing situations can be very helpful with procrastination, because I think sometimes we get ourselves into a bit of a loop there of asking so many questions, looking for more and more data. We're never going to have enough data. There is no certainty in the world. That's a fake of our imagination in many ways. We're certain of absolutely nothing in reality. What are we certain about? So I think, saying that, somehow getting to the point where you have enough information to make a decision that you can say, I mean, I'm quite mathematical, so the way I get around my procrastination is to look at, probability and how certain I might be of a particular outcome given the information that I've got. So if I'm 80% certain of a particular outcome, mostly I would be satisfied to actually take that next step. But again, the things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, we say. So if I need to be 100% sure of something, I am not going to move forward because I'm never going to be there. The world is changing every day. Today, I was a different person yesterday than I am today, and tomorrow I'll be a different person again. The world would have moved forward. Everybody in the world has to move forward. We're all one day older, and technology would have probably taken one huge leap. So tomorrow, the problem may even be a completely different problem. So if I don't move today, then tomorrow I'll be back at square one, trying to gather enough data about the difference between A and B. So again, when you've got sufficient data, 80% of the data, to be able to say, with reasonable doubt, I can make this decision, then I think you have to move forward.
It is that's where we have the overlap with perfectionism, and that's why sometimes it can be so hard to be aware of what behavior we're taking. Are we being a perfectionist for the sake of getting something done properly, or are we procrastinating at this point to avoid taking that step forward? And I find it interesting that there are almost 3 levels to it, to procrastination from my point of view. As we speak, I'm just thinking about this out loud.
Excellent.
There is a very clear procrastination of, I'm sitting on my couch and I'm watching TV, or I'm going out, I'm entertaining myself, I'm postponing doing the things that I have to do. Very clearly, it's very evident. Then there's a middle level where you are procrastinating with work stuff. So you are working. I'm doing accounting. I'm doing more of, I don't know, research on this other topic that could be useful in the future, or I'm working on making our landing page nicer, or I'm doing our LinkedIn page. So you are actually doing work, but you are avoiding again doing what you have to do. And this one is hard to spot, but a bit easier to spot than perfectionism, which is so complex to realize that you are going beyond doing good work because you're working what you should be doing, but just going over the top. And that's I think a very interesting realization for me, and I feel it constantly. What are we trying to avoid by filling ourselves with tasks, work, entertainment that is not the actual thing that we need to do?
Yeah, I think that very, very interesting insight, what you've just said, that generates 2 key thoughts in my head. One is around natural personality preferences, and that certain people are much more likely to procrastinate than other people. There's
I'm
just
guilty
a style.
there.
Me
Yeah.
too, big time. And the other is about sources of energy. And maybe a third is about productivity. So maybe we look at all 3. Certain personality types definitely are last minute people. They are pressure prompted. So in that sense, and it tends to be quite creative types, people who tend to be much more forward thinking, more innovative, more creative, more visionary. People who look for options in life, scenario building and so on. So they're basically opening up their options. They're not trying to close down and get something done, which is another a completely different type of personality, but they're actually trying to open up doors, open up the options, look forward and think what could be, and use their imagination. And then they find, oh, there's all these exciting options, all these different things that I could be doing with my life. And then it gets really hard to choose what to do. Because then we basically have to focus in, and we have to cut down those options down to a vital few, maybe even to one. As a founder, you can't start 5 businesses simultaneously, even if you might want to. And for some of us, and I think this is what we share in our personalities, is that we get so excited by the novelty and the newness that often we can very easily get waylaid. I mean, finishing stuff off, crossing the T's, dotting the I's is boring, and that we struggle with boredom to the extent that it can be really very, very difficult to force ourselves actually to do the things we really do need to do that are not exciting, not new, not novel, and, are not showing us the potential of what could be. They're just stuff that has to be, ticked off in a checklist. So I think, getting yourself to the point where you are able to do those. And the thing I've learned definitely there that I recommend to founders is to think about not time, but think about energy. When am I going to do certain things? And I think understanding your personality in terms of sources of energy is absolutely essential, so that you ride the waves of energy. I think kind of like a surfer, if you get on the top of, you get to a point where you've just done something that you really know that absolutely energizes you and makes you feel like you could conquer the world. That is a great moment to get on and do those things that you hate doing.
Just when you're on the top. So when you're full of energy from doing things that energize you, that's the moment to switch. But that's very hard because you're switching on your, almost at the ecstasy of the day. That takes it's a difficult decision.
You've got plenty of extra energy there, and you can waste a bit of it on doing something completely mundane because you're on a high anyway. So you'll get it done so fast. I would say you're at least 4 times more productive when you're riding the wave of energy. You've just done something that's really made you feel, wow, you could solve, world hunger in 5 minutes moment. And that is going to give you, so nothing is going to stop you. Nothing's going to get in the way. Everything is easy, everything is super quickly done. And if you leave it to the last minute, and procrastinators, guilty my lord as charged, do leave it to the last minute. And often if that's at a low energy point, you will find it's going to take you literally, it's like your mobile phone. If the battery's empty, it's empty. You can't do very much with it. It's an amazing tool, device that you can do all sorts of things with, but the battery's empty. Good luck with that.
Could it be that using the theory of energy as a way to make procrastination a tool? For example, I procrastinate doing things that I love. At work, for example, I do things that give me energy. I design, I look at creative things. Could I then just be mindful of, okay, I'm procrastinating now. I'm doing extra things that give me energy, but then let's use them as a way to get energy so that I can jump in this other thing that I don't want to do.
Yeah. You could actually strategically look at your diary and think, okay, I'm going to allow myself the luxury of having fun doing X. And then I'm going to schedule in, something that I find incredibly dull, but needs to be done. And it needs to be done today. And literally think of it in a much more strategic way of how do I actually keep my energy levels high? So I would say minimum 70%. You could look at your diary. I look at my diary in terms of color code. It red, obviously yellow, and green. And certainly, even the anticipation of about to go into something that's going to be, I know is going to be a massive energy boost. Even having that in my diary and thinking, okay, this is, I'm about to plug myself in and get this huge surge of energy. And then how can I use that in a positive way? Because when your battery is 100% charged, there's nothing you can do that's going to make it 105. So you might as well use the 100, use some of that energy for something that you're not so keen on doing, which is going to drain energy. Obviously, energies flow in and out, and then recharge it with something energizing again. But definitely always, if you're coming to something and it's last minute and you're on a 50 or less, and then you've got this awful activity that you've been putting off anyway for weeks or months or whatever, the chances are it's going to take you far too long to do it, and you are not going to be motivated, and that could end up really draining your batteries. And the third is productivity. I mean, I think people who procrastinate, typically again from their personality, they are pressure prompted. So however much time you give them to do things, I cheat myself into setting much shorter windows of opportunity with, milestones or deliverables. So instead of saying, okay, I've got 3 months to do X, I've got 3 months to, let's say, write a masterclass for XYZ. I know in month 1, I'm going to do absolutely nothing. In month 2, I'm going to say, oh yeah, that masterclass. I must get around to that sometime. And in month 3, as it gets closer and closer, I know my subconscious will start working on it. Definitely. I can rely on my subconscious brain to start working on it because it sort of doesn't trust my conscious brain. Saying, she's not working on it. She's not working on it. So I think that's me. I've developed a certain set of non-preferred skills there. But sooner or later, as the time gets closer and closer, that's what prompts me into, okay, oh my God, I've got to do this right now. And that gives me such a massive surge of energy that I ride the wave, knowing with my experience that I will be able to get it done in time. And actually, that's such an adrenaline rush. I'm literally using, it's really the positive, the dopamine, all that. I'm sure I'm just massive, sort of hormones and chemical cocktail there that is actually meaning I'm at my best. But this doesn't work for everybody, definitely not. And if you're working with people that don't function like this, they have to trust you. Otherwise, all they can see is in the first 2 months, you've done absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And you're not productive and you're not going to get there. And if they don't trust you, they'll pull the plug on you. So as a founder, if you're, let's say, working with investors that are looking at, what's your output over a period of time X, and there doesn't seem to be any because you're using procrastination and you're pressure prompted and so on, that could go hideously wrong. So again, maybe occasionally having these sort of deliverables that you're always working in a pressure prompted mode, but with much shorter time windows. I think that's one way to manage other people's understanding, let's say, or their perception of what's going on, and that you are actually producing something. It's just, your productivity is not a straight line. And so either a straight line, which is consistent, the same amount of productivity over time, or you are a procrastinator, in which case your productivity is very, very low, and then it goes exponential as the deadline gets closer.
These are amazing recommendations. Keeping a journal, a diary of the energy flows has been massive for me. I've been doing it more carefully in the last few months, and it really changes how I tackle my day. And I'm using my tasks in a very strategic way. And the other recommendation of putting a deadline to yourself, that's also very interesting. And it all comes down to knowing yourself, right? What works for you? That's probably the main question you gotta ask yourself. But those tips are great. And I just gotta ask, and this is for me, how when you switch from one task to the other, you switch at the peak, right, of your energy.
Yeah.
What if you feel like you're in this flow state? What if you feel like because you love what you're doing, you're in it and you're just, on a roll? How do you stop? Do you wait until that's over? What are your thoughts?
I have to laugh because this is me at my worst. Telling myself that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm riding the wave and I'm staying on the top of the wave. And basically, normally that means I continue to do what I'm doing, which I'm really enjoying. But it's probably not doing what I should be doing. And then I end up spending hours doing it and have such a guilty conscience at the end because I know that basically I'm using it as an excuse.
That's true. Yeah.
So, yes, I mean, I'm kidding myself. And sometimes I know I'm kidding myself. I had a little sort of conversation saying, we know we're kidding ourselves. But, I'm going to ride this wave because I feel like doing it and I'm going to give myself this luxury. And maybe occasionally you need to treat yourself to this. But I would say no.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think you do a deal with yourself and you stick to the deal. And you give yourself whatever, the time to do the things that really charge the batteries once it's charged. I would use the energy you've got and then go back to it and recharge the battery because, there are things that are very energizing. I think, again, just what you just said was very interesting, which is about understanding yourself. In order to understand this, you do really need to reflect on yourself, back to self-awareness, self-reflection, which is absolutely crucial. A critical element of a successful founder is going to be somebody that looks at themselves very carefully, curiously, critically. Have you ever found that, you're very low energy and don't know why? And have there been some interesting moments where you thought, "Oof, I'm really drained. What's happened here?"
Yeah, absolutely. I think that happens often. And sometimes it has to do with another P, a P that I struggle a lot with,
That
which
was
is the next P, which is people pleasing.
yes.
I feel that most of when I feel drained before even starting to do something, it's usually coming from for that pressure. Um, because people pleasing is not really a pleasure for me. I would say I do it unconsciously, but I don't think it's something that is fun. Not because the act of whatever task I'm doing that is being led by, people pleasing is not fun on its own, but because I know deep down that I'm doing something that I either should not be doing or that I don't want to do, or that I'm being affected by it. And that, you know, takes my whole energy, knowing that that's coming, or that, yeah, I'm just being a victim of that. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
What would be an example for you of people pleasing? Because again, we use that word, or two words, I guess. We use it a lot. I'm not terribly sure that people always mean the same thing. So,
yeah,
what would be, one or two examples of you people pleasing, and what's the bit about it that is so energy draining? So, if you,
yeah. I mean, there are very simple and mundane examples. Um, Something as easy as saying no to an invitation and going to a party, for example, or even something as dumb as setting an appointment for a day that I know that I will not be able to make it, or at a time, and postponing saying no. That's something that it's very weird that I do. And because I literally see the email and I say, I'll say no tomorrow. I'll reschedule it tomorrow. And I think it all comes down to that, to really a fear of, or of, I don't know what really, because I'm basically just wanting to say yes, to this person or to this group or to whatever. Um, and it's horrible because then it drains my energy. The fact that I have to then say no, and then I have to reschedule, or I have to say I'm not gonna go, and then it starts a process of how do I say it and what do I say, what's my excuse, and then I also blame myself. Why didn't you do it on the first moment? That's one example that comes to mind right now. But of course, there are other stronger and more impactful situations at work, like um, taking in suggestions very lightly as recommendations and actions that I should be taking from whomever. From, it can be friends, it can be family members, it can be investors, it can be employees, people that would say, "Oh, this is what makes sense," or "This is what you should be doing," or "This is what it's a good idea." I'd find myself sometimes thinking, "Yes, that's probably what I should be doing," but then actually reflecting on it and saying, "No, this is not what I want to do, and this is not what I believe in." And it is such a complex situation to be in, because I'm a person that has um, I love building very bold, crazy visions. And I love being contrarian. I love challenging um, situations. I love that. So I need to remind myself of that's who I am, because I do find myself saying yes, and or trying to do whatever I'm recommended to do just to please that person. That's my analysis. I don't know if that's really what's underneath, but yeah.
yeah, because we've known each other for a while. I think what's really interesting there is that it's probably for you. a catch-22. You're a really nice guy, and I think you want people to like you probably, and there can be a lot of that can be quite a stumbling block if we really do want people to like us, and if we want everyone to like us. We can't please all of the people all the time. That's also not possible. So I guess to one extent, you're trying to meet their needs, which is a positive thing. On the other side, of course, you have your own needs and values. And I know that your values are very strong, as are mine. And that maybe at some point that you're prepared to cross the boundaries of your own value set, potentially, to meet their needs first and encroach upon your own, which then raises the question of authenticity. So if I'm saying yes, but I actually know it's a no, this is a question to myself. If I'm saying yes when it's an actual no, and I know it's a no, and it has to be a no, how honest am I being with A, myself, and B, with the person opposite me? And I know that honesty is one of my core values. So I get myself then really, in an authenticity trap, which is why the guilt comes in and this drains so much energy. And, so it really becomes quite, even it might be such a small thing as, do you want to come to my party tomorrow night? And yeah, of course. And you haven't got time, or there's no way you can get there. And you're saying yes. And even in that moment, you're crossing your own boundaries.
Yeah.
You're creating an issue in your own head around your authentic self. How do you reconcile saying yes when it should be a no with your authentic self?
I'm still on it. I'm still trying to do that. I cannot say that I have the answer and that I have mastered it. It is probably my biggest development opportunity and development area. I do work actively to spot those situations where I'm where I see myself giving in easily. But it is exactly what you said. I'm not living by the core values that I stand by. So that drains a lot of energy. That is very demotivating. And it makes work very hard. Because you have to live with those things, and it takes so much out of your day-to-day energy dealing with those things that you could have avoided from the very first moment. So I cannot say I've mastered it. I think I've made a lot of progress, and a big part of it has been almost finding power somehow, and finding standing by who I am and what I believe, and just becoming more powerful. Saying no for me takes courage, and if I have that courage, then I'm strong. So it has been a process of becoming stronger, more confident, and it is very interesting because these are not things that I would have described myself as before, as non-confident or not strong, and I still don't. And that's why this topic of people pleasing as part of the imposter syndrome is so important, and it's so relevant for me, because the moment that I opened that door to understanding what the situation was is the moment where I could actually face it and become stronger in that sense to change. Because I've always felt strong. I've always felt confident, but this has been an underlying issue or opportunity that has always been there in my whole life, even though I feel like I'm very bold. I'm a very bold person, and I'm a strong person. I'm confident, but it is one area that I had to spot to work on.
Yes, that's really interesting. I mean, we did a poll recently looking at these 4 Ps and seeing which one was the most prevalent. And I think in society as a whole, the people pleasing is by far the most prevalent. And I think it raises 3 points, really, I think. One is authenticity, which we've touched on here. The other is around trust. And what does people pleasing mean for trust and trust-based relationships? And I think it's definitely worth us having a look at that. And the third is around boundary setting. And I think that's another point, which is, where are those boundaries? When does somebody cross your boundaries, and why do you let people cross your boundaries, which is an incredibly dangerous thing to do. And there's a whole piece of work around that. But I say authenticity, I think we have covered. But if we look at trust, and I'm very mathematical, so I use a trust equation because it keeps it simple for me. I can always think then, if I'm seeing a relationship isn't really working as well as I would like it to, and I'm not having the influence that I would need to have, or building a relationship that I need to build for whatever purpose, I need to look at my own trustworthiness and where I might be falling down, so that the other person doesn't feel that they can trust me, or why I might not feel that I'm able to trust the other individual. So I just basically look at the equation, think, okay, what can I actually do to improve the situation, increase the trust? So that trust equation is on the top, the numerator, it's trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, meaning how well do I know that person, or how much of myself do I show to that person in terms of, do they really know me, or do I put on this mask and pretend to be somebody else? And that's added all together, and then all divided by self-orientation or self-interest. I think the problem with people pleasing is you can lose credibility if, you always say yes and you never deliver. I mean, that is not very credible, and it's certainly not very reliable. So in terms of credibility, reliability, you can damage both of those by, not showing up when you say you will do, and not delivering when you say you will do. You're sort of not keeping your word. And in terms of intimacy, I guess if you're known to be like that and people know that you say yes when you mean no, then maybe it won't necessarily damage intimacy. But again, I guess that would depend on whether there's a resonance in terms of the value sets, and whether you own that and really recognize that that's something that you do. But I think the biggest concern around trust is self-orientation. I mean, if you're saying yes when you're actually going to say no, and you're going to let the person down, you're not going to do what you said you're going to do. Is that about you, or is that about them? And I think the problem there is it's actually about you. Your need to please others, your need to be liked is therefore self-orientation. And this is the biggest killer of trust, is that people see that you're doing it for you and you're not doing it for others.
Which is crazy. Sorry to interrupt you, because you think that it would be the opposite, that
Indeed.
As a people pleaser, you're doing it for them, but you're not.
Yeah, you're kidding yourself. You're doing it for yourself, because the idea, and as you said, the courage to turn up and be the authentic you requires an awful lot of courage. And we can't have courage without fear. So we're back to fear.
And what is the fear here?
Fear could be fear of rejection. It could be fear of, I don't know, it could be fear of failing socially, effectively. It could
What about the fear of not being liked, of not being loved? Because I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. I want people to love me, to like me. And I think that's how I've been dealing with it at this point. Like, why do I need to feel that people love me or that like me?
Because you probably don't love yourself, and self-love is a really big issue that I've spent my whole life trying to address, which is because you probably don't love yourself enough. I put that in brackets at the end. It might not be a complete no or yes, but it could be, it's just not, you don't love yourself enough, and you're probably not giving yourself enough grace and enough room, and enough self-care. I mean, we know, we've all been on plane rides where it's, if there's an accident and the oxygen masks come down, you must put on your mask first before you help anybody else. Otherwise, you're a liability.
Yeah.
But how often do we try to help somebody else before we help ourselves? Yeah. You're trying to meet somebody else's needs, but not meeting your own. And ultimately, you have to meet your own needs. Otherwise, there's a huge problem. So, it might end up being you're almost like falling on your own sword, aren't you? That you want to please others, and in trying to do so, you actually end up alienating them and damaging trust, because you're not credible, you're not reliable, and they think then it's really all about you.
Yeah.
And the whole thing, our whole society is about being liked. Are we being followed? Are we being liked? And this is creating, well, one thing it's creating is post-truth, which is, we just basically cherry pick things that we want to believe about people and believe them. We started here talking about Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, and people believe all sorts of things about these individuals. I think they do turn up, and in the sense of they are authentic to themselves. What we make of that, and to what extent we decide that is good or bad, relies to a certain extent on the whole post-truth. And I think they're not necessarily playing to the populace's idea about what is good or bad, and whether they're the flavor of the month or whether they're out. And this can swing. I mean, it can go really 180 degrees in just a matter of days or weeks as to whether somebody is, up, liked or not. So if that's what's driving us, then we're really going to have a real problem with people pleasing, because, we're going to end up doing the things that we get liked for, which could get us a very long way away from our true value set and our purpose in life. And that could end up being, well, people pleaser can end up be very derailing in terms of you may never get there. And certainly as a founder, you'll never get there.
Yeah. And you definitely should not aim for it. Because if there is something that at least I want to embrace more, and what I think kind of makes me special, which is something that is also weird to say out loud, but I do feel like it makes me special, the way I think and the things I imagine and I dream of. And there is no way that I will make those things happen if I aim to please someone else, because no one will ever understand what's in my mind. And no one will probably buy into those visions before I do. So this one, people pleasing, the fear of not being liked, it is for me the most direct one to the feeling of being an imposter. Because if you don't care about being liked, you don't need that approval from other people. So you will never be or feel an imposter. You'll just be. So for me, this is probably the clearest connection, but also because it's mine. And probably some other people will see the more clear connection between the others, depending on which one they're going through. But yeah, it is a fascinating one. And
if you can just say and repeat it, I mean, brainwashing, it's a useful tool, literally, to take positive affirmations and repeat them on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
You're walking 10, 15 minutes a day, literally just let it go through your head. Keep repeating the sentence. I am good the way I am. I am great just as I am. I am enough. I am enough. I am enough. Reinforce, these things by repeating them. We learn by repeating things. And just hearing positive affirmations, and you can make yourself a little, a recording and just listen to it when you're having a low moment, thinking, I am not good enough, and all the negative emotions and all those, sort of negative thoughts that you get about yourself, and when you're questioning yourself critically and undermining yourself and having lower self-esteem and so on, to listen to it and say, I am enough.
Yeah.
I think, you can be very confident but have very low moments. And if your confidence can be lost because somebody doesn't like something you do or say, or you don't get resonance with an audience, and that is enough to destroy your self-confidence, then, you do need to have a tool. And I would say certainly positive affirmations are an incredibly helpful way of just reminding yourself that you are good enough. Just be. I think that's a really very helpful piece of advice. I like that very much.
Yeah.
I am enough. Definitely.
I think I mean that's has been a big help for me to do those affirmations. Nevertheless, I feel like the work is not done until I really understand why do I need to be liked. And that will be for another podcast, that story. Yeah, so that we can move on.
You are liked very much.
Yeah. It's about me
It is
liking
about
myself.
you. It's about you liking you. That's the difficulty,
Yeah.
not other people liking you,
Yeah.
because you're a lovely guy, as I said. But it's always about the work that we've
Yeah.
got to do on ourselves. Inside ourselves is where the power is going to come from. Nobody externally, another million people saying how much they like you is not going to help you to actually feel more that you like yourself. That's again on the shadow, and really diving deep into that shadow work and saying, why do I feel so inadequate?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I feel that I'm not enough? What's causing that? And how can I actually change that so that, I move the dial? It might not be from, on to off or off to on, but it's moving the dial away from, 9 times out of 10, I don't feel good enough, to 3 times out of 10, I don't feel good enough. And that would make a huge difference in anyone's life. But people pleasing is a very interesting one. And in the end, we end up with exactly what we set out to try not to do. Interestingly,
Yeah.
absolute massive self-sabotage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as an outcome of that, we sometimes stop and we have what it's called a paralysis, a decision paralysis or analysis paralysis. At least in my case, that fear of not being liked has prevented me from doing many things. To be honest, this podcast being one of them. I feel like I've now taken the courage to do it, but I feel like I should have done it earlier. I mean, it's something that has been on my mind for quite a long time. I mean, I'm happy with my own timing, right? It has been a journey to, realize where I am, who I am, what I want to do. But we do get stuck. So tell us a bit more about paralysis. How does that, present itself?
Yeah. I think analysis paralysis is often when it could be something that's going to happen in the future or something that's happened in the past, where you constantly go through the loop of trying to understand why it was the way it was and what you could have done differently in order to, if it's a past event, how you could have dealt with it differently in order to get to a different result. And literally, it's like a constant loop that you can't get out of. You're constantly questioning what happened, what you did, why you did it the way you did it. And you're diving so deep into the analysis that, it's an endless depth. It's an abyss in its own right. You will get lost in it like a black hole, and you won't get out of it. And that stops you from moving forward. Again, it's one of the things that has plagued me in my life. I think the Frozen movie helped me because I love the song "Let It Go," and whenever I realize, oh God, I'm in that loop again, and I'm not getting out of it, I'm not moving forward. I'm trying to understand why that happened and what and if I'd done something different, and you can do, those sort of contingencies forevermore. If then. There's an endless number of options that you could generate there, and that's not going to get you anywhere. But I tend to literally almost like plug and play, in my head, the Let It Go song and think, you've got to let it go now. You've just got to let it go. Now, that could be something you physically do, or it could be, for me, it's, literally singing that song in my head, or occasionally, if I'm at home alone and no one's around, I might just literally sing it out loud and say, you've got to let this go now. You've got to draw a line under it and let it go.
Yeah.
Um,
Is it like a spinning wheel in your head of thinking about it, not doing anything about it? Is that what you mean? Let that go. Let those thoughts go so that you can get to action. Do you get to act on it?
I think if it's something in the past, you don't get to act on it. You get closure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, certain personalities are it's much more about the process itself than it is about the result.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me, I'm a very process-driven individual. I love results. I've learned to be good at generating results, and obviously, because they get measured, and then you can see how perfect you are or are not, as the case may be. But for me, it's much more important about the process. If the process has not gone well, and I feel that it was in some way, my responsibility, my fault. And again, fear of failure is kicking in big time here. That's one of the biggest fears that I struggle with. unfairly being, determined by what I consider success to be, which is probably a whole podcast in its own right. But really going back and trying to understand why did it not work, what was wrong with it, and so on, and really getting lost in that and not saying, okay, what are the lessons learned? What will I do differently next time? Commit to that, move forward. And I think that's where I've got to now. But I think it's something that's been very difficult to let go, particularly things where I really wanted them to work and they didn't work. And that could be very personal things like, relationships, for example. I find it incredibly difficult to let relationships go. Even if I know that they are no longer serving me in any positive way. In fact, they may be doing the exact opposite. They may be actually very detrimental to me. And as I'm sure you all know, and it's, anyone who knows me knows that one of my favorite topics is narcissistic personality disorders, and how if you're trying to please a narcissist, you're never going to get there. Whatever you do is never going to be enough. So, when you look back on a relationship with one, let's say a professional or a personal one, you need to close that relationship down and say, it is now enough, draw a line and move on. And trying to do that is a very, very difficult thing because you get into the loop of codependency. You are reliant on, with back to people pleasing, you are reliant on them giving you an acknowledgement of they are satisfied with what you've done and they're happy with what you've done. And you can stay in that loop forever. That is a loop. Because you're codependent, dependent on their positive affirmations and responses and so on. So closing that down and moving forward, what's really key there is that you don't get caught then in this loop of what would I have to do differently? How could I possibly have got more attention and more positive feedback, or made them love me more, or made them like me more, or maybe make them value me more, or promote me more, or whatever it is that you're trying to get from that individual. And then you can get lost in constantly thinking that through. And equally, if we're looking forward, if you're trying to get certainty, will I get what I want out of the situation? And you're looking at more and more different scenarios and trying to analyze what's the best scenario. And, you can generate almost an infinite number of options in the future. And that could stop you from ever doing anything. How many people say they want to emigrate, they want to write a book, they want to lose weight, they want to, and how many of them actually turn that into realities? And again, that's, they're thinking through all the different ways in which they might be able to, with the different diets they might go on, or the different countries they might emigrate to, or the different stories they may write, or, what's that first chapter, how am I going to open it? And the more that you're thinking through all those different options and analysing which would be the best possible option, then you're not actually doing anything. You're just, it's a mental exercise of, going through, generating options and evaluating them with some sort of criteria, but actually you're not turning that into next steps.
How do you transform that into next steps? What do you recommend people the moment they spot they are on this loop, which I think it's tough, but I think it comes down to everyone, to each person, how they can spot it, unless there are specific tips from you.
I think if it's something you want to do in the future, just start really small. So let's say you've never run anywhere before, and you want to run. Let's say you want to run because you want to lose weight, you want to get fit, whatever. And you decide running is the right thing for you, but you've never really been a sporty person. So set yourself a goal of literally putting on your running shoes, wear whatever you want, and run to the end of the street and back. And that's the goal. And it could be a really short street, or just, literally run to the next house and back. It doesn't matter how far it is. What matters is you put the shoes on and you run. And then you come back and you say, yeah, woo, I did that. Great. I ran all the way to that and came back again. Set yourself a really small goal and achieve it. And then next time, set yourself a slightly bigger goal and a slightly bigger goal. Because running is one of those things that, you'll find that you'll make massive progress really quickly if you just keep doing it regularly. So maybe the first couple of times you run to the house next door and back, or maybe three doors down and back, and then maybe you run to the end of the street and back, and then maybe you run in a block, and back. Before you know it, you will be increasing those distances if you do it regularly. But don't set yourself, I'm going to put on my trainers and the very first run, I'm going to run 10 kilometers, because chances are you're not.
Yeah.
You'll find a reason not to go out the door. The hardest for runners, always, the hardest thing to learn to run is that first step out the door, getting the trainers on, getting out the door. And that first step is by far the hardest. The rest, and tell yourself, if I've had enough, I can go straight back. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. I'm doing this for me. But I say, set realistic, very easily at first. If you know that you're really reluctant to start something and you're finding different ways, why not? And, just start.
Yeah.
Just take that first baby step, do it, come back, and really celebrate the success. This is something I've been bad at my whole life long, is celebrating successes. Celebrate the success.
Yeah.
But set yourself a goal for the next day and the next day and the next day. Little goals that take just minutes. Because you're effectively changing your whole attitude towards it and your mindset about what you can and cannot do. So maybe today you can't run 10K, but maybe you can run to the door next door and back. And maybe next week you can run round the block and back. And maybe in a month's time you can run 2 or 3 kilometers and back. And I think you'll find within 3 months you can do that 10K.
Yeah.
And you'll come back and say, wow, 3 months ago I couldn't, I was going to next door and back, not because necessarily you were not fit enough to run 10K, because you probably might well be, but in your head, you'd already failed before you even put those shoes on.
It's all about setting the right expectations all over again. And expectations and realistic expectations, I used to see them as not being ambitious. Like if I would set an expectation that was not crazy high, then I was being mediocre. But now I've come to realize that that's really not the case. It's just playing against me if I'm just setting unrealistic expectations. And I had to really fight that feeling of, well, if I'm not going to run 10K, I might as well not do it. It's not worth doing it if I'm not doing it right from the beginning. Or, I don't know, if I'm not building this company for it to be worth this many thousands of millions in the next year, in the first year, then it's not worth doing. And I think that's a I don't know, personally has been a challenge. One thing that also helped me get out of this loop it's very simple. It's just writing things down. So the moment I'm on it and I find myself on it for a long time, I just get my phone, open a note, and I just write it. I just write the steps. What do I need to do in order to make that a reality, or decide how to move forward with that. That is very helpful. Has been very helpful for me. It gets it out of my head. And even better if I put a calendar blocker to do it, to do whatever I need to do on a given day, or put a reminder. That really breaks a pattern of being unstuck on that wheel of thought. Yes, I think it is fascinating how all of these 4 P's are, like you said, they overlap, and they are really just a way to understand that we are going through the imposter syndrome, that it is a way in which it manifests, and that in a way in which we can spot it and understand a lot more why we're not moving forward, or why we're stuck. Why are we stuck? And that is massive. And I really I'm fascinated about how you jump from one to the other, and you're not stuck in one. You may be, but you can also be going through all of them. It has been for me an immense self-reflection exercise, and really helpful.
I think it might be just literally like putting different lenses on the same reality. So it's almost like we're taking slightly different angles and looking at, the same thing, and seeing, okay, there's this thing around, analysis paralysis. There's this thing around people and self-love and so on. There's one around questioning everything and not letting go. And then obviously this trying to achieve or reach for something that we know we can never achieve. So we're setting ourselves impossible targets. I think in many ways it's literally just like putting different lenses on different things. Just one last point, and again, it's a P. Maybe I like the letter P, I don't know. But one last point, thinking about our last point there, the analysis paralysis, is, putting on the shoes, going out the door, persistence. I mean, I think it's absolutely essential if you are a founder or have aspirations to be an entrepreneur of any description, that you persevere, and you are going to fail so many times. It's not about the failing. It's about getting back up, and trying again tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, and having the courage to do it day in, day out, day in, day out. I've never met a serial entrepreneur who hasn't failed more times than they've been successful. And I think that's the point. I mean, even going back to Mr. Musk and, post PayPal, when he was investing in Tesla and SpaceX and so on, there was a point at which he needed to make a decision. Do I just keep the 90 million that I have and be satisfied with my life? Or do I invest all of it, risk it all in building future ventures? And that was a moment of, probably not one that he made in a spur of the moment, but really probably had to think about quite hard, but decided that, I think entrepreneurs, it's a breed in that sense that it's always about the next challenge. And I think the territory, what comes with that is imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. So I think, if you are suffering with any or all of those 4 Ps, and you're a founder, then you are not alone.
That's great. And a final question: can you ever cure yourself from the syndrome? Do you feel like can you be completely free of it?
Maybe I'd ask a question back. Would you want to? I remember there is definite positive elements that are coming out of these 4 Ps. So as we said, perfectionism, you're striving for it. And as a result of it, with the continuous learning that you're creating around yourself, then you're going to reach excellence. So you get a positive.
Yeah.
I mean, you could destroy yourself with it if you don't get it in check at some point. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely going to have a positive. And I think also, finding that balance, finding the tipping point where it's no longer serving you, because ultimately what I see in my work is our biggest strengths potentially will end up being our biggest derailers. We have to know the point at which there's a tipping point and the strength actually becomes a destructive element. If we overdo it, we become like a Frankenstein's monster. So our strengths are strengths only to a certain point. And certainly as leaders, we need to begin to develop other aspects of our personalities that are not innate, in order to create that balance in us. So, if we're people that like to leave our options open, we have to develop the ability to close things down, shut things off, close doors. And I guess that's what development is about, which is finding this balance between our innate, preferences and tendencies, and then a way in which we can learn how to limit those so they don't become destructive derailers in the end.
I think that's a wonderful way to end it. It is the work that you do, that we do, analyzing what our strengths, our development areas, and understanding that in the context of our personalities. It is a fascinating work, and I'm blessed of having the chance of to work with you. And as I said at the beginning, and it has had a massive impact on my journey. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful of having had time to sit down with you. I hope we can do it more often, and there's many more topics that I would love to cover. So thank you, Shirley, for the time and the nice conversation.
Well, thank you, Jaime. It was a joy, as always, to spend time with you.
Thank you.